Welcome to this Webucation module produced by Mid-Council Ministries in the Office of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA on understanding the structure of the Senior Ordination Examinations, otherwise known as the Ords. This module is a companion piece to Tips for Writing the Ords that introduces a way of analyzing questions on the tests. Here we will be looking at how each particular exam is put together. Since there is a definite pattern in terms of the types of questions asked, recognizing where you are in each exam structure can help you know what kind of response readers will be anticipating. There are currently 5 subject areas in which potential teaching elders in the Presbyterian Church USA must demonstrate competence. The Bible Content Exam, or BCE, differs dramatically from the other 4 exams. It consists of 100 multiple-choice questions, whereas all the other areas are essay exams. For that reason, it is treated in a separate training module. In this video, we will be reviewing what are sometimes called the senior exams: theology, worship and sacraments, polity, and exegesis. We will conclude with a few final tips that relate to all 4 areas. Beginning with the examinations administered in the summer of 2014, all 4 areas of senior examination will be taken independently by the candidates without a proctor's supervision. Together with this change, these exams will all become completely open book. Those taking the exams will be able to consult any resources available to them, with 2 important provisions. First, candidates are not allowed to consult with anyone about any aspect of the questions or their responses. The work on the exams must be exclusively their own. Second, they must properly cite any published resources that they do consult, whether those resources are in print or online. They should not, however, cite course notes from a particular professor or seminary. Such disclosures violate the exam instructions related to maintaining blind review of the exams. Finally, keep in mind that the theology, worship, and polity exams remain only 3 hours long. Readers will only be expecting formal research in the multi-day exegesis exam. Just because candidates may consult broader resources does not mean that doing so would necessarily be the best use of the limited time available. The Theological Competence Ord always asks for responses to 3 specific kinds of questions, each corresponding to a specific section of the test. As it happens, the Worship and Sacraments exam also shares this basic structure, and the polity exam is very similar. Here, in the theology exam, these 3 sections of the test are presented under the headings Confessional Heritage, Constructive Statement of Christian Doctrine, and Application to Ministry. Now, in fact, all the questions require application to the work of ministry. The very purpose of the Ords is to provide an opportunity for you to demonstrate your ability to apply what you have learned in coursework and field education to the work of ministry. Clearly, then, we need to look at each of these types of questions more closely. The first section of the exam contains a question relating to the ability to draw on the confessional heritage of the Reformed tradition. Most people naturally focus on the word confessional in that section heading, and quickly realize that it directs one's attention to the Book of Confessions that is part of the PCUSA's Constitution. But the word heritage is equally important. Heritage directs our thinking toward history, and so the section heading should remind us that this question assesses a person's ability to apply what has been learned in historical theology coursework, specifically classes dealing with the Church's confessions. The confessional heritage question typically has 2 parts: a required response devoted to explaining the confessional heritage on a particular theological issue, and a second required response that applies that information to a specified ministry context. It is anticipated candidates should be able to complete both required responses in this section in about 1 hour total. In this section, they will be required to provide citations from the Book of Confessions. They may use either the printed or PDF editions available from the Office of the General Assembly, or both. The questions will specify both the number of citations and the number of confessions from which they are to be drawn. Readers will be looking for specific paragraph citations and even quotes of the exact wording as part of any discussion. The second section of the exam is presented under the heading Constructive Statement of Christian Doctrine. Once again, that section heading can provide important clues. Constructive theology is a term used to identify that discipline within theology that formulates or constructs responses to contemporary issues. Like literal construction projects, there is an assumption that you will use existing materials rather than simply create something out of thin air. But the emphasis here is on communicating Christian doctrine, that is, teaching about faith and life. As in all sections of the theology exam, questions in this section will generally have 2 required responses. In the first response, you will provide your discussion of the issue about faith and life, constructed from your knowledge of theological resources. In the second response, you will apply that knowledge to a specific ministry context. It might ask you to respond to questions posed by people in a ministry scenario, or perhaps to write a prayer that would express that principle of Christian doctrine. This question is also intended to be completed in 1 hour. As in the first section, you are permitted access to the Book of Confessions. However, this question will likely also require that your response be constructed from your broader knowledge of the Scriptures, classical and contemporary theology beyond the Confessions. Readers will be looking for references to identified sources of those types. In general, the year 1900 is the dividing point between classical and contemporary theology. Given the time constraints, you will be working primarily from memory. So readers will anticipate more general kinds of references and will not be expecting direct quotations. But if you do directly quote from Scripture or other resources, you must provide the appropriate forms of citation. The third and final section of the theology exam is presented under the heading Application to Ministry. As we have seen, application to ministry contexts have been a part of the previous questions as well. And in fact, you will see that the questions in this section are very similar in form to those found in Section 2. The difference will be in the focus of the content. Rather than dealing more generally with Christian faith and life, these questions will focus on specific issues related to ecclesiastical, political, social, economic, and personal ethics. Once again, it is expected that this section can be completed in about 1 hour. But remember that the total 3-hour time limit for the complete exam will be strictly enforced by the online exam administration system. Like the Theological Competence Ord, the Worship and Sacraments exam is divided into 3 sections, reflecting on our Reformed theological history, contemporary issues, and direct application to ministry. The headings for these respective sections are Reformed Liturgical Heritage, Constructive Theological Reflection on Reformed Worship, and Application to Ministry. In all sections of this exam, candidates are expected to include within their responses appropriate references to the Directory for Worship. For this exam, then, candidates will be expected to use both the Book of Confessions and the Book of Order. Readers will be looking for specific paragraph citations or direct quotations from the Directory for Worship, as well as more general references to it. The first section, on the Reformed liturgical heritage, assesses one's ability to draw on the Reformed theology expressed in the Confessions when doing the practical work of ministry related to the structuring of worship, including the administration of the sacraments. The question will require a specific number of citations to paragraphs from a specified number of confessions, and may look for direct quotes where appropriate to the discussion. You will also want to show how this theology supports the related practices in the directory for worship. Once again, the expectation is that this section can be completed in about 1 hour. The second section of the exam deals with constructive theological reflection on Reformed worship. In the case of the Worship and Sacraments exam, the word constructive in the section title indicates that candidates will be expected to use in their responses a broad knowledge about the fundamental principles of Reformed worship contained in the Directory for Worship to create or construct specific worship practices which are likely not spelled out by the directory itself. As in all other sections of this exam, candidates will be expected to identify relevant material from the directory and may cite specific chapter or paragraph numbers or provide direct quotations since they will have access to the Book of Order. It is expected candidates will spend up to 1 hour on the required responses to this question, but manage your time wisely, because time spent beyond an hour on this section will reduce the time available for the third and final section of the exam. The final section of the exam has the specific heading Application to Ministry. All questions in the Worship and Sacraments Ord will require responses that direct candidates to apply their knowledge to specific ministry context. So what is the identifying focus of these questions? The distinctive emphasis in this final section is your ability to apply provisions in the Directory for Worship to concrete situations, and to do so in ways that demonstrate appropriate pastoral sensitivity to particular persons. Both your specific knowledge of the requirements contained in the Directory for Worship and your ability to use them in helpful and caring ways will be assessed by the readers. They will want you to identify what in your answer comes from the Directory for Worship, providing specific paragraph citations or direct quotations. It is anticipated that about 1 hour will be used to respond to this question, but the 3-hour total limit allotted for the test as a whole will be enforced by the exam administration system. Following the pattern of the Theology and Worship Ords, the polity exam is divided into 3 sections. Like those exams, this one begins by asking candidates to draw on our heritage, but the following 2 sections are specific to this exam: constitutional order for the particular church and constitutional order as a tool for ministry. For the polity exam, candidates are expected to use the current Book of Order throughout the entire examination. They may use the print or PDF editions published by the Office of the General Assembly, or both. Readers will be looking for citations that provide specific paragraph references and that quote directly from the Book of Order, where appropriate. Notice as well that the whole Book of Order, not just the form of government portion, may be consulted during the exam. Use the foundations of Presbyterian polity, the Directory for Worship, and the rules of discipline when needed. And in fact, some questions will specifically ask for citations from those parts of the Book of Order. Pay close attention to the number and type of citations required for each response. The Constitutional Heritage section, which opens the polity ord, focuses on the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity section of the Book of Order. These chapters contain the basic polity and theological principles that have been passed down to us over the years and provide the foundation for the constitutional governance of the Presbyterian Church, USA. Typically, questions in this part of the exam will cite one of these foundational principles from this section of the Constitution and direct the candidate to provide specific examples of how it is worked out in other sections of the Book of Order. Often, a second portion of the required response to this section will ask the candidate to express this principle and its application in some form of communication, either to a whole congregation or a specific group within it. The Section 2 question addresses concerns that repeat themselves regularly in the practice of ministry. Most often, these questions will present a brief scenario and then ask the candidate to identify a specified number of issues and to provide references to the Book of Order that relate to the issues identified. Usually there are several more issues that could be raised than the number requested by the question, and so there could be a variety of appropriate responses. Candidates will also be asked how they would respond in such circumstances, and to show in their response both a proper understanding of the polity and appropriate pastoral concern. The committee which develops these exams has often reminded candidates in the past that in this context the word pastoral means not mushy or permissive, but carryingly constructive. The final section of the polity ord will be formulated to provide candidates with an opportunity to show how they might use the polity of the church not, as it's sometimes characterized, as a constraint in which ministry must be done, but rather as a tool to support and advance the work of ministry. As with other questions on this exam, candidates should pay close attention to whether the question asks them to write responses directly to individuals within the scenario, or whether they are to describe for the readers how they would respond in such circumstances. Each question in the polity exam is designed to be answered in about 1 hour, but the only time limit applied by the exam administration system will be 3 hours for the completion of the full exam. Keep in mind that spending more than an hour on any particular question reduces your ability to give adequate attention to the other questions. The structure of the Bible exegesis exam is different from each of the other exams. Although the Bible exegesis exam has gone through a variety of formats over the past decades, the purpose of the exam has always been to demonstrate an ability to both interpret the Bible in a manner consistent with a Reformed understanding of Scripture, and to use that interpretation in the ministry of the Word through preaching or teaching. The current format of the exam has been purposely designed to distinguish it from both exegesis papers written for seminary courses and the exercise of presenting an exegesis and sermon on a prescribed text, usually required for final assessment by the candidate's CPM and presented to the calling presbytery as part of the formal examination for ordination. It has also been formatted to more closely reflect the practice of pastoral ministry and the structure of the other senior ordination examinations. It is the only one of the examinations that expects candidates to have made broad use of research materials, although it does not permit discussion of the examination questions or the assigned passage with others, including conferring with writing specialists or others who might provide editorial review. Candidates are given approximately 5 days to complete the test, from 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday until noon Eastern Time the following Thursday, and special accommodations for extended time are not granted. Like all the exams, candidates are being assessed on their ability to apply academic training to pastoral ministry. Because more extensive research is encouraged, and because the exams require responding to questions dealing with the original Hebrew or Greek of the passage, candidates are reminded that the information presented should be technically correct, but should not be presented in a manner that depends on technical jargon. Responses are being evaluated by future colleagues who are ruling and teaching elders for its appropriateness in communicating to people in the pews. All candidates will write on an assigned scriptural passage from either the Old or the New Testament. Within the cycle of exams given during a program year, July through June, there will be 2 Old Testament and 2 New Testament passages, but each particular exam will have only 1 passage. The book from which the passage will be taken for a particular exam will be announced after the registration period closes. Just as examinations in the other subject areas present specific ministry contexts in their questions, each passage will be paired with a specific ministry setting that will require the preparation of either a sermon outline or a lesson plan. Examples might include a Bible study for the women's group, a sermon as part of a series within a liturgical season, such as Advent, or a meditation on the theme passage for a training event. The combination of a specific text with a specific occasion is a basic and routine part of pastoral ministry. This ministry context will be set out at the very beginning of the exam and should guide the candidate's responses in each section of the test. After the presentation of the ministry context, the first section of the exam consists of a series of exegetical questions about the text. These questions represent three areas of concern. First, there will be questions about the language of the text, in terms of both its translation into modern languages from the Hebrew or Greek original, and issues of its literary character. Next, you will be asked about the historical situation, both of the engagement between God and God's people related in the text, and the time in which the particular scripture was written. Finally, there will be questions dealing with the scriptural and theological context of the passage, provided by the broader canon of the Bible and the theological tradition of the Church. These questions reflect issues that are readily encountered in studying commentaries and other biblical studies resources. They also reflect the kinds of questions that might be raised by folks in a congregational setting. These basic issues about the text provide both the foundation for and set limits on interpretations of the passage consistent with the use of Scripture within the Reformed tradition. A total of 4 responses will be required to questions in these areas. Each response will be limited to 600 words. In the second section of the exam, candidates will develop a faithful interpretation of the assigned passage. By the phrase faithful interpretation, the instructions for the examination mean one that is consistent with the facts about the text's wording, its historical, social, canonical, and theological contexts, and so forth. This interpretation will be presented in 2 stages. First, the candidate will present a 50-word focus statement that presents a central theme related to their interpretation of the passage based on their broad study of the passage and not just the material presented in response to the questions in Section 1. They will then present a 1,200-word essay supporting that central theme in the focus statement by a careful and critical analysis of the text. Candidates are encouraged to develop readings of the text that show their creative use of interpretational methods appropriate to the text. The essay will be evaluated by the readers based upon its coherence, consistency, clarity, and whether it persuasively supports the focus statement regarding their faithful interpretation of the passage. In the third and final section of the exam, the candidate will present the sermon outline, lesson plan, or other ministry work product directed by the ministry context at the beginning of the exam. This section of the test will be assessed on clarity, consistency with preceding sections of the exam, appropriateness for the specified context, and so forth, and should be no more than 600 words in length. This Webucation module can only provide a summary treatment of the structure of each senior ordination examination. For more detailed discussion on the types of questions included in each exam and suggestions on how to prepare, be sure to review the Handbook on Standard Ordination Examinations, which is also available on this website. Keep in mind that the best preparation for the ordination examinations is also the best preparation for your future ministry. Be involved in the supervised practice of ministry with a local congregation, applying what you have learned in your academic studies. As you develop your gifts for ministry in that way, you will be not only preparing to take the exams in the future, you will be serving God's people in the present.